Hello and welcome to the WARC Podcast. I'm Paul Kemp Robertson, the Chief Content Officer at LIONS and the co-founder of Contagious. Now, I'm really excited to team up with WARC on this episode because it's featuring an industry legend. He's going to talk to us about all things creativity, what art can teach business, and advertising in an attention crunch. And if you'd like to watch this episode, we're also hosting it as a video pod on YouTube and, of course, warc.com. Now, Sir John Hegarty needs absolutely no introduction, but we're going to give him one anyway. In 1973, John co-founded the London office of TBWA, and then in 1982, he started Bartle Bogle Hegarty, one of the most celebrated advertising agencies in the world today. You might have read one of his influential books, Hegarty on Creativity or Hegarty on Advertising. He was knighted for his services to the advertising and creative industries in 2007, and perhaps most importantly, he was also a guest on the vaunted BBC radio show Desert Island Discs in 1981. And today, Sir John is co-founder and creative director of the Business of Creativity. Sir John Hegarty, welcome to the WARC Podcast. So John, you co-founded the Business of Creativity. So you obviously see a correlation between the two terms. So I was just going to ask you to start with, what's your kind of view on the current state of commercial creativity and how it's driving genuine business impact?
Well, I think actually it's very bad.
Mm-hmm.
I think businesses don't understand the value of creativity. That in fact, actually, it's a kind of a secret sauce that we have that actually really drives business. And I'm kind of on a mission to get businesses to understand that they have to engage with creativity. And in fact, because I spent my career, you talk to companies and you'd be the creative person brought into the room. You could see they went, whoa, creativity, I don't know much about that. And it's absurd because actually starting a business is a creative act. You have to have an idea. You have to kind of decide what it is. What are you going to call it? What's it going to look like? How is it going to sound? How is it going to feel? All those things are driven by creativity. And then, of course, as you go on, innovation, creativity is at the core of innovation. And the more you understand it, the more you're able to engage with it and make it work better. And yet businesses, if you say to them creativity, they say, well, not sure it's relative to us, or we don't really use it, or we don't know about it, which is a nonsense. And it is a kind of a power that we have that actually helps us make sense of the world and make sense of the business. So defining it, understanding there are two types of creativity, what's at the core of it, are all essential for business development growth.
Yeah. And also it's persuading or proving its commercial effectiveness as well. Because there is always that sense that, creativity is associated with risk. But to your point, people that do found businesses, there's a risk attached to that anyway. So you imagine there'd be a respect for risk because it gets disproportionate results if you pays off.
It is a shame that creativity and risk have been kind of put together, but creativity isn't necessarily about risk. So look, let's define creativity. All right. So that's the first thing you say. If you say to somebody, define creativity, what you tend to get is a kind of, it's about taking a number of things, putting them together and helping people see things in a different way. And I go, that's kind of the process of creativity. So what's at the core of creativity? And this is so important. The core of creativity, because first of all, we are all creative. That's what separates us from the animal kingdom. Dogs do not get up in the morning and think about how to change the world. We do. Or change our clothes or our hair, whatever.
Or draw a tree.
So if we're all creative, you define creativity as an expression of self. Now, that is absolutely crucial. Now, often people go, I'm not sure about that, John. And I say to them, right, how often have you heard a film director, a writer, whatever, a painter, talking about their next piece of work? What is the phrase you'll hear more than anything else? The phrase you will hear is, what I wanted to say was this. That's your creativity. So understanding that is crucially important. So if creativity is an expression of self, then how interesting is that self? How involving is it? How engaging is it? How curious is it? How kind of, understanding is it? All of those things feed the self, which is your creativity. So that's important.
Yeah. And there's obviously a parallel between self and brand. Like a brand has to stand for something, have a purpose, a point of view. So, great. Okay. So obviously from, looking through the WARC lens, you look at media fragmentation. It's a massive challenge for brands looking to build a consistent message across different channels. So how do you think the current state of fragmentation is impacting creativity right now?
Well, it's impacting it badly because people think you can't have a unifying idea when, as it fragments more, the more you need a big unifying idea to hold it all together, to keep those pieces together. So the trouble, I think, today is creativity is being driven by technologists. And technologists aren't very good at creativity. They're good at inventing things, which is partly creative, but they're involved in technology. And it needs creative people to come in and say, no, you don't do it like this, you do it like that. So we've got to stop listening to the technologist. Or we wouldn't think, a writer today wouldn't think, oh, I must talk to the printer about how he's going to print my book or she's going to print my book. We think that would be absurd, wouldn't it? Well, 600 years ago, that's what you did. William Caxton, Gutenberg, they were printers and they had power because they understood about printing. But you think today you talk to a printer about your book? No, they just print it. And I think we've got to understand the role of technology is to help us express the ideas that we have. Now, the trouble is, because of this fragmentation, people think, well, you've got to have a fragmented idea. No, it's the exact opposite. You need a unifying idea that holds it all together. And that way, the consistency of that then breaks through.
And you can express that unifying idea in lots of different ways.
Totally. And it happens all the time. I mean, William Shakespeare wrote Romeo and Juliet, I don't know, 600 years ago? My maths isn't very good, but it's something like that. And it now gets expressed in music, it gets expressed in film, because it's a great story, and that's what we have to understand. Have a great story and find lots of different ways of expressing it, which actually, getting onto the subject of AI, you will be able to do, but you've got to have a great story.
Yeah. And you look at things that are big ideas have got a really strong story at their heart. So you're not hungry. You're not you when you're hungry for Snickers or Dovery or Beauty, all these platforms. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So obviously across the industry, we're witnessing, we've seen it here this week at Cannes Lion, like warp speed, the impact of AI on, the creative and operational output. So here's the sort of friend or foe question. Do you think AI could be transformational for creatives, or is it seen as more as a threat to their livelihoods and position in the food chain?
Well, I mean, I'm cursed as an optimist, all right? So, I look at it and I go, I see the opportunity. And I think there are two things I think we should remember about AI. First of all, it's going to democratize opportunity. So it's going to mean everybody has access to it now. You can't lock it away from somebody else. It's out there, all right? Just like electricity, all you have to do is plug your phone in or your whatever it is in. It's out there. The second is stop thinking of it as a tool. It's a collaborator. But it only collaborates with you in the way that you talk to it and how you talk to it. It only collaborates in a way when you, in a way, engage it to do something great. So I think in terms of the future, I kind of think we're all now creative directors because, we've got this tool, it can, this collaborator, it can get us to a certain point. Now we have to instruct it. Just as I did when I was a creative director. Teams would come in, I'd look at the work and that's not very good. And I think you could change that. And there's an idea there, pursue that. Well, now I can have that conversation with AI. I mean, yes, it could reformulate an idea, but remember, it's reformulating what's out there. Point of a brand, the point of an idea is difference in some shape or form, because that's how you stand out, all right? And the difference obviously has to be meaningful. So I see AI as a really, really interesting development. I think it is, never make predictions about the future. You're almost certainly going to be wrong. But I think it is going to be profound. And I'm going back to my kind of Gutenberg thing. In a way, when Gutenberg invented movable type and the printing press, nobody realized he was heralding the Renaissance. That outward outpouring of knowledge and understanding led to the Renaissance. So we don't know where AI is going to take us. We don't know. But I think it's going to be fairly amazing because it's just liberating us. And that is going to be an amazing opportunity in the sense that everybody's now going to have to engage with their sort of creative spirit.
Yeah, and I think also you've talked about that human dynamic. I think Mark Pritchard in his talk at Cannes Lions yesterday was like one of his definitions of creativity was saying it was that unique energy that gets generated when humans collaborate on generating ideas. And I think any brand's going to need that, despite what you look at the capability of AI, but you still need that human dynamic. And
you need that sense of what's the idea? What is it I'm trying to communicate? And it's very funny you talk about Mark Pritchard because he's making a very good point, but he does keep going on about collaboration. And can we get over this collaboration thing? Collaboration, obviously we do that. But actually, we as individuals have ideas. It is our right to have ideas. It is our right to say, I believe in this. Go back to what's the definition of creativity? An expression of self. It's not an expression of the group. It's an expression of self. It's you saying, I believe this. And that's where the great advances come. Somebody has an idea. Yes, then we collaborate with other people to make it happen. But we've got to have people understanding the truth of who they are and the contribution they can make. And this kind of constant, I kind of always call it Soviet thinking, collaborate. That's what the Soviet Union made you, collaborate. The group is more important than the individual. No, the wrong way around. The individual is more important than the group. It then gathers the group in because they gather around an idea. So a big rant about collaboration, which I normally do. It's a wonderful word, but it's overused. And there's a lovely thing David Hockney says about collaboration. It usually leads to compromise. And he's absolutely right.
Absolutely. And where's the role for compromise in creativity? So I think it leads, well, you talk about self and you talk about identity. So I think this leads nicely into the next question, which is creators or influencers, as they were erstwhile known, are playing an increasingly dominant role in the industry right now. And I think Unilever very famously is planning to increase its investment in creators, I think 20-fold, and move towards 50% of its total ad spend being spent in social. So how do you think this new reality will impact brands? How are brands going to think about marketing? Is it going to change the canvas for creativity? If half of a brand's created product is now handed over to essentially third parties to execute.
Well, again, I think it's a terrific opportunity. What's happened here is the gatekeepers have been taken away. What's happening with creators is they're developing their own audience. I mean, think of them a bit like magazine editors. Magazine editor has a magazine, they have an audience, they know how to talk to that audience, they know the kind of articles they want and they like, and they know how to inspire them. And think about a creator in the same way. That's what they are, except they don't publish a magazine. It's kind of an audience that they have through digital means. And I think it's a terrific, again, moment in time. But it requires a brand to be absolutely determined in what it is and what it believes in. So it understands who are the right creators to work with, who are the people who can really help us promote our beliefs, our philosophy, whatever it might be, in a way which is sympathetic to the brand. So it requires, in a sense, a lot more discipline. It isn't about handing over. It isn't saying, well, we don't have nothing to do with us anymore. It is about being absolutely sure in what it is you believe in and then working with the right creators to kind of get that message out there. I think it's really exciting. I think this, I always said the sort of 60-second, the television commercial was the really truest art form of the 20th century. I think creators are the truest art form of the 21st century because of what we can now do, that I can develop, an audience, and I don't need somebody telling me what to do, and then that audience has value to a brand. And I think that's a really exciting development. I mean, the question I often get asked is if I wanted to go into advertising today, what would I do? And I think I would definitely start as a creator because I'd go, I take my funny drawings, I turn them into philosophical messages, I try and animate them with a bit of AI and have fun with them and send that out there and develop an audience. And in that way, then I have power, because a brand comes to me because I've got an audience, but I know how to talk to that audience. In the same way that a brand might go to a magazine editor and say, I'd like to do a bit of sponsored content. It's the same thing in a way. There is nothing new in life, really. It just reappears in a different form. But I think that's a really exciting thing. And I think it's a fantastic development. I think the danger for brands is that they think, oh, we're losing control. We've got to have these kind of creators taking over. And it's no, if your brand is really strong, if it's really powerful, if it's really got a set of beliefs that has true value, then you're going to succeed. I mean, think about sort of creators. I'm a bit obsessed with Taylor Swift, actually. I think she's phenomenal. And people kind of, talk about her, but they talk about her because she has a very strong brand. She has belief, she has a system, and people talk about her. And in a way, a brand's got to think like that. Am I interesting? Am I distinctive? Is what I'm saying relevant to people, as opposed to I'm just pushing more garbage at you? And if they look at it like that, then they'll fail. So
there's an honesty and a vulnerability to Taylor Swift as well in terms of how she tells her story. She's also very adaptive when it comes to adjusting her choice of music and so on. So again, it's that flexibility that brands perhaps need to
she
flourish.
Creates something of value. I don't need to listen to Taylor Swift, but I want to. She understands, and a great artists understand the difference between need and want. I need toilet paper, but do I want that one that is kinder to the environment? That's what a brand has to think about. How do you go from need to want?
Absolutely. So reading the press, seeing some of the talks here at Cannes Lions, it feels like an existential crisis is hitting the industry. I think creativity, on the surface, you could argue that it feels less valued than media. There's lots of jobs disappearing across various networks. So if I was interviewing the 25-year-old John Hegarty right now, you touched on it in your last answer, but how would you feel about your future career in the advertising industry? Would you be apprehensive? Would you be energized? Would you be thinking, I am going to create my own business and stamp my name on the door?
I would definitely think I'm going to create my own business and I'm going to take control. I grew up, you're saying the 25-year-old John, I'm 81, and I grew up in a different era. And I kind of think I had to go through gatekeepers. I had to convince them that the work I was doing was going to have an impact. Now I could come into the industry and take control. This is my idea. Nobody's stopping me. And I think that's really exciting. And then I develop my business to become, now I'm an agency. And a brand comes to me and says, well, we'd like to work with you on X, Y, Z. And if they work with us, they work with us. If they don't, they don't. That's fine. But I'm in control. And I think that sense of control is fundamentally important because it's all about your ideas. It's all about putting out the ideas that you want to put out there. And I can always remember, I remember a wonderful creative team I employed way back in the sort of the mid-90s. And they were really, really talented, but they were quite uncompromising. And I remember going back to them. We'd sold an idea that they had, and it was a really, really great idea, but the client wanted to change a few things in it. And you always had to know how to compromise, where to compromise. And I remember going back to them, and they were saying, look, the client loves it. They want to just change that, and that. And they just said, why? And I went, well, he feels that, well, it's not going to make it better. It's going to make it worse. Now, it was marginal to the point of, they were losing the bigger picture. But I completely understood what they were saying. It was like, why don't you just buy the idea and run with it? The changes you make are so marginal and they're just actually slightly annoying. You do it to, let them go. And I love that sense of how uncompromising they were. Now, in this world, if I'm dealing with my audience, I don't have to make those compromises. I live or die by my ability to have a great idea and make it work. And it's my responsibility, not somebody else. I don't deflect the responsibility onto somebody else. And I think that's the wonderful thing today. So I would be definitely starting as a creator. I would develop an audience, hopefully, with my ideas. And if I didn't, then that's tough shit. It's like if you're a musician, if you write music, if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. So write a better song or write a better tune or whatever it might be. And I think you're in that place. And I think that's really exciting.
So in one of your recent newsletters, you propose that art has more to teach business than we often give it credit for, especially regarding creative ambition. So can you just expand on that? How does that concept of art as business instructor translate to marketing?
Well, I was taking a very business-like approach to it. And it was funny. And it came out of somebody said to me, what are your 10 top business people? And I sort of thought about it and I thought, who would I? And then I thought, Picasso, number one. If you think about it, if you'd bought a Picasso, you could have bought a Picasso in 1930 for maybe, I don't know. I mean, let's say, $30,000 or whatever it might be. Today, it's worth $30 million. Oh, that's pretty good. Oh, that's a very good business. And what's more, look at what he's generated. Exhibitions, books, kind of that. And so I think if you look at art as business, you might say, well, that's a terrible. No, it's not. We can look at it as business. Artists have generated more value than businesses. So if we're talking about value, which is what we are talking about, so that's how I got to that point. And I sort of went through it and I got to about 35 before I mentioned any business people because, Mozart, well, that what value they've created. And I think we forget how amazing art is and also what it teaches us. It teaches us about constant refreshment. It teaches us about innovation. Don't stand still. Be aware, be daring, be different. And it all business kind of lessons are there in art. And it proves it over time. Look at it, Picasso today, do you want to buy one? About 30 million. I don't know.
And the rest. So let's stick with ambition, because you wrote recently that it's the job of leaders to cultivate ambition and that starts with the creative brief. So can you explain why you think that the brief still remains so important?
Well, I think it always is, because you've got to understand, this is the beginning of a journey and you've got to start on the journey. What is the ambition? Whatever journey you start on, there is to a certain extent a kind of, I'd like to row across the Atlantic. I'd like to, fly to the moon. I'd like to, whatever it is, there's an ambition in it. And whatever brief you're working on, it's important to put ambition in there. Is not to, in any sense, constrain the idea. It's to open it up to make people feel, wow, this could possibly be dramatic and dynamic and we can always bring the idea down. It's very difficult to lift it up. So I think a brief is fundamentally important. It's the beginning of a journey, and that journey must contain ambition. It was the famous, wasn't it, Shackleton, little classified ad about wanted, people for a job, dangerous, there might be glory, there almost certainly will be death, blah, blah.
No pay.
And it was one of the most famous classified ads ever. And it was, 3 lines in a newspaper, but it had ambition in it. And people responded. People respond to ambition.
Yeah, absolutely. So we touched on this already, the R word, but I think many business leaders declare that, creativity is both a skill and a mindset to be championed. But then in recent research by LIONS Advisory on the state of creativity, only 13% of marketers consider their companies to be risk-friendly, with 29% being regarded as highly risk-averse. So why do you think brands have become so risk-averse? What's the argument for encouraging more boundary-breaking creativity for those risk-averse clients?
Well, I think the first thing is I start with stop using the word risk. Words carry meanings and people respond to them. And that's why they're there. That's the importance of a word. And I found many years ago, I was asked to do a speak at a conference. It was for Unilever, actually, on risk, adopting risk. And I was asked to, you're creative, John, you'll love risk. Go up and tell them about risk. And anyway, about 2 days after I was briefed to do this, I came back to person organizing it and said, look, I've got a real problem. Actually, I don't like the word risk. I don't get up in the morning and think, wow, I'll have a risky breakfast. Maybe I'll drive a risky car, go to a risky meeting. I don't like, and I was very aware of words have a force and a power to them. And that when you use the word risk, you see somebody lean back. So I said to them, and then you talk about risk management. And that's a kind of stupid thing, isn't it? It's a bit like those names of those bands in the 70s who were called Curved Air or, Led Zeppelin. How can Led Zeppelin be led? It would crash. They knew it was kind of stupid. And yet, people said, oh, yes, we can manage risk. And I said, you can't. And you're using a word that people won't adopt. So why don't you stop doing that and use a word that they might adopt that actually carries everything that you need to do? So I said, instead of using the word risk, why don't we talk about exciting? Here's an exciting idea. Now, when you use that word, people lean forward. And in that way, you've got them in a positive frame of mind. Because the trouble with risk is negative. Exciting is positive. Use positive words. Everything's risky. Walking through that door is going to be risky. It could be, who knows what can happen. Everything's risk, So I think the danger is we use the wrong word. And I think you'd get business leaders to be a bit more approachable if you use the word excitement. Here's an exciting, I get up in the morning, I have an exciting breakfast, drive an exciting car, go to an exciting meeting, go to on an exciting holiday. Yes, 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 yes. Don't use the word risk, and then you might get a different response.
Yeah, good point. So you recently called out Martin Sorrell, formerly of WPP, and now executive chairman at S4 Capital. And you, in an interview on the BBC's media show, he spoke about AI, about algorithms, tracking. I think you call it stalking.
I call it stalking. There's a law against that, by the way. There should be one in marketing as well.
I think he was talking about the vital role that data plays. And I think you wrote, all that data and precision and not one mention of creativity. So your point there was that if S4 Capital perhaps focused more sharply on creativity and its ability to generate commercial value, then Sir Martin wouldn't be staring at a share price that has dipped 90%. So do you want to care to expand on your thoughts there?
I think that's done it perfectly, hasn't it? I think again, because he comes with an accountant's mind, a measurable mind. And business is about trying to do the unexpected. It's trying to create something different. And this obsession with data, data's fine. It's okay in certain things. No data went into developing an iPhone. Most valuable company in the world, Apple, none whatsoever. Was there any data involved in James Dyson developing a bagless vacuum cleaner? No, none at all. Nobody said, oh, that's what we all want, a bagless vacuum cleaner, James, off you go and invent one. This obsession with data actually curtails expansion. Now, I could argue if I'm a maker of fruit juices and I'm going, I think that we ought to make I need to make another flavor. Then some data coming in telling me that, more and more people are, eating guava might be, that might be interesting. Maybe we should make guava. But that's a use of data. But these people who live or die by data end up with incremental growth, not exponential growth. And I think if you're in a business, you're looking for exponential growth. That's what you want. And that's where success lies.
Yes, because you talked about creativity as a multiplier, about being famous is the ultimate ambition, and that
fundamentally important.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about attention. Again, I've been really enjoying your activity on LinkedIn. You're
Lovely.
sort
of please join me,
opinionated. But you had a really interesting post recently where you mentioned that TED Talks are now getting shorter because allegedly audience attention spans are shrinking. Now, you pushed back at this. You declared that the only thing getting shorter is my patience. That the problem isn't people's ability to pay attention. It's that what they're being asked to pay attention to is average, forgettable, and meaningless.
Yeah.
Would you like to expand on that, please, John?
I'm more than happy to expand on that. I mean, I think we've had this whole debate about people's attention spans getting shorter and shorter. I remember in the sort of mid to late 80s when MTV came along and everybody said, oh, that's it, attention spans with young people is now 3.5 minutes because that's the length of a video and a song and it's going to shorten short. Bullshit, and then all of a sudden along come great programs that, are sort of, 3 hours long and people are watching it. What they're not watching, paying attention to is average stuff. We're pumping out so much average content that it's just, I call it digital landfill. And people are just getting tired of it. Game of Thrones, for God's sake, how many episodes was that? How many series was that? Incredible. People were glued to it because it was really interesting, whether you liked it or not, or, whatever, Breaking Bad or whatever it might be. There was in the early noughties, there was a detective thing, Danish, one of those Danish, Scandi noir, called The Killing. And it was something like 21 episodes and there was one killing and everybody's glued to it and talking about it. And you go, hold on, I've just been told people's attention span has kind of, diminished. And here we are, 21 episodes glued to the TV about this killing. And it's about the value of the content you're putting out. If it's interesting, people watch it. And the trouble is we're putting out so much stuff. And there's that lovely line I often use, which is, we're all artists, but some of us really shouldn't exhibit. And I think the problem with the democratization of opportunity, it's also democratized a lot of average stuff. That's the problem, really.
And there is that danger as well that that potential for AI to create multiple versions of personalized content. Yeah. You're going to get mediocre marketing is actually going to potentially affect those attention spans.
There's going to be there's a tsunami of stuff coming at you.
Right. So again, it's that sense of being able to filter and choose what you think is relevant. So, yeah. So I think building on from that, I think a holy grail for marketers is word of mouth, creating a contagious idea that sort of turbo boosts media investment for free and fulfills that notorious phrase of brands inserting themselves into culture. where do you sit on the argument?
Well, I certainly think all advertising in this way is trying to drive word of mouth. Word of mouth is the most effective form of advertising. It's me saying to you, well, we all know what it is. And all you're doing is trying to drive that, to get people talking about you. And I don't talk about it being inserting into culture. I talk about it being a part of culture. And I think great work does that. Great advertising does become a part of culture. I think
become, that suggests organic, it suggests authentic, whereas inserting sounds like you're trying to bar your way in.
Well, people see it as having value. And therefore it becomes a part of their common lexicon. We talk about it. And I think advertising has forgotten how to do that. But I think also it's forgotten that what it's trying to do is to get me to talk about you. And, somebody once said, a brand is defined a brand as a sort of the most valuable real estate in the world, a corner of somebody's mind. You've inserted yourself into that. And I think we've forgotten how to do that. I think we've become, sort of in awe of the technology, not in awe of the ideas. As I say, I go back to my printing thing. What if, when was the last time you heard a novelist talk about the person who was going to print their book? No, don't think so.
Yeah. And again, it's that whole sense of emotion, so ideas that generate emotion, therefore feeling, and therefore that brand gets embedded in your longer term memory structures because it's meant something to you in terms of the stories that it's told. So one of the advantages that we hear about AI is its ability to rapidly create personalized content. But if this becomes the norm, are we going to lose some of those shared experiences, the sort of water cooler moments, because everything has become so atomized, so fragmented, so disposable that you don't get these big, sort of shared experiences through ads or pieces of content that everybody sees?
Well, I think there'll be an element of that, of course, because somebody won't understand how to use it. I mean, just out of interest, I've enjoyed watching Clarkson's Farm, and I've done a huge amount for farming, as we all know.
Yes.
Anyway,
we should put in context. That's a British TV show.
British TV show. It's on Amazon, by the way. It's one of their biggest shows on Amazon globally. So, but it is worth watching. But in it, what somebody's done is they've taken two babies who are like the characters, and it's taken the dialogue from the show and it's made these two babies talking about it. And that's a water cooler moment. But the point about it is it starts with the big idea, Clarkson's Farm, and then it puts that out there and enhances the program. It enhances what it's about. And that is a wonderful demonstration of what AI can do for you. But you have to start with a profound idea that then you can play with and have fun with. And that's a classic. I mean, I remember when Daniel Craig took over as Bond, and I think Casino Royale was his first one. And there's always that thing in Bond, isn't there, where he's, would you like a martini, shaken or stirred? And you're all kind of waiting for that moment. And I remember the movie, and I'm waiting. I wonder how he's going to handle this. And then there's a card game, and there's a break, and he goes to the bar for a drink, and he says to the barman, he says, martini. And the barman says, shaken or stirred. Bond looks back at him and says, Daniel Craig looks back at him and says, do I look as though I care? And it was a brilliant example of how it played with the genre. But because it was in my psyche, because I knew that this was the whole thing, then it played with it. And that wasn't AI, obviously, but that's an example of how we can do something with AI to have fun with who and what we are. And that's where I think it'll be incredible. And you can do it. You should watch these two babies, the Clarkson Farm babies. They kind of look like the characters, and it's brilliant. And it's done really, really well. Really well.
And to your point, it goes back to created by what we would say is an influencer, content creator, and they've got that freedom and abandon to come up with ideas they think will resonate.
Absolutely, yeah.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, John. We've run out of time now, but I really appreciate your time, your energy, your wisdom. Fantastic. Thank you.
Great stuff. Lovely talking to you, Paul.
That's all we've got time for on the WARC podcast today. A huge thank you to Sir John Hegarty for joining us. So if you enjoyed this interview, be sure to follow up and get new episodes of the WARC podcast as they drop. So we'll see you next time.